The evening of my 26th birthday was supposed to feel special. I wanted it to be one of those simple nights where family gathers, laughter fills the rooms, and for a few hours, everything feels warm. Our brownstone on Revere Street in Boston looked beautiful, at least on the surface. The living room smelled of sugar and roses because my mother had ordered a 3-tier cake with pink icing from an expensive bakery downtown. My father set out the candles carefully, humming to himself as if all was right with the world. My younger sister, Kayla, stood close by in a silky dress, but I noticed how her eyes weren't on the cake or even the guests. They were fixed on the necklace around my neck. It wasn't just any necklace. It was a platinum choker, slim but elegant, with small emeralds that caught the light each time I moved. My grandmother Ruth had given it to me on my 21st birthday, 5 years earlier. She had pressed it into my hands with a soft smile and said, "Nora, promise me you'll keep this for yourself. Guard it with your life." To me, it was more than jewelry. It was a memory, a piece of her I carried every time I wore it. I knew it was worth in money, about $85,000 according to the appraisal, but to me, no dollar amount could compare to the comfort it gave me. When the music slowed and people gathered around to sing, Kayla leaned in so only I could hear her. "Give it to me," she whispered, her voice sharp though her lips kept a smile. "It will look better on me." I froze for a moment, caught between anger and disbelief. I tried to keep my tone kind as I said, "No, Kayla. This necklace is mine. It was Grandma's gift. I'm not giving it away." My mother's ears are always sharp when it comes to Kayla. She caught the words instantly, and her expression hardened as though I had committed some great sin. My father turned his head too, his voice rising. "How dare you deny your sister?" he thundered. The room fell silent. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. Kayla folded her arms, tilting her chin up as if I were a thief caught red-handed. Her glare was heavy, filled with contempt, as though my refusal wasn't just about a necklace, but proof of some deep flaw in me. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stand firm. "The necklace is mine," I repeated, my voice shaking but steady enough to be heard. "I will not give it away." That was all it took for my mother to snap. She lifted the cake knife, but instead of cutting neat slices for the guests, she shoved the cake forward. The top tier wobbled, then collapsed, sliding down and landing squarely on my head. Thick frosting smeared down my hair, my face, even into the neckline of my dress. Laughter broke out from a corner of the room, though others gasped. I heard the clink of a wine glass, then the unmistakable click of a phone camera. In that humiliating moment, all the air left my chest. I could hardly breathe. I pulled the necklace from around my neck with sticky fingers, quickly wiped it with a napkin, and tucked it into my purse. My cheeks burned, not from the frosting but from shame. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the living room, past the faces that looked at me with either amusement or pity, and stepped into the cold Boston night. I sat on the steps outside, trembling as the frosting hardened in my hair. Tears blurred my vision until the city lights turned to smears. I felt small, like a child scolded for something I had every right to defend. But I knew one thing in my heart: I could never again accept this as love. Not the kind of love where your parents side with your sister against you, not the kind that humiliates you in front of others. My hands were shaking as I pulled my phone from my purse. I scrolled quickly to the one person who had never once treated me as less. My grandfather, Henry Campbell. He lived in a white Cape-style house in Barnstable, on Cape Cod, 2 hours away. His voice came through the phone after a single ring, calm and steady. "Nora?" "Grandpa," I sobbed. "They threw a cake on me. They shouted because I wouldn't give Kayla the necklace Grandma gave me. They all laughed and I walked out." For a moment, there was only silence on the line. Then he spoke, each word deliberate. "Come see me in the morning." That was it. No lecture about patience. No plea for me to make peace. No suggestion that I should try harder to be kind. Just an invitation to come to him because he understood that I had finally reached my breaking point. I ended the call and sat there for a long while, the Boston air sharp against my skin. A few guests slipped out of the brownstone behind me, but none spoke to me. I pulled my coat tighter around myself, lifted my purse, and walked away. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing clearly. I was done letting anyone, even my parents, throw cake at me and call it love. That night, lying alone in my small apartment on the edge of the city, I couldn't sleep. The scene replayed in my mind again and again. The frosting dripping down my face, Kayla's smug smile, my mother's sharp eyes, my father's booming voice. I thought of Grandma Ruth, of the way her hands trembled when she fastened the necklace around my neck and whispered for me to guard it. She had known. She had known how my parents favored Kayla, how their love was always conditional when it came to me. That necklace wasn't just jewelry. It was proof that someone believed I deserved something precious, something worth keeping. I turned on the lamp beside my bed and opened my purse. The necklace gleamed softly, still beautiful despite the rough napkin I had used to clean it. I held it against my palm and swore to myself that I would not let it go. Not for Kayla, not for my mother, not for anyone who tried to convince me that I didn't deserve it. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I felt tired, yes, but also resolved. I realized that all these years of trying to win my parents' approval had led me nowhere but pain. They had always compared me to Kayla, always demanded I bend, always insisted I sacrifice. And I had done it, time after time, hoping that one day they would finally see me as enough. But instead of appreciation, I got ridicule. Instead of love, I got a cake shoved in my face. That night, I made myself a promise. I would no longer play their game. If love meant losing myself, I didn't want it. If family meant humiliation, I would step away. When I finally drifted off to sleep, I knew that tomorrow at my grandfather's house would be the start of something new. He had told me to come, and I trusted him with all my heart. I didn't yet know that his plan would change my life forever. All I knew was that the girl who had stood crying on Revere Street had taken her last blow. From now on, I would fight for my place in this world, even if it meant standing alone. The next morning, I drove out of Boston before the city had even finished waking up. The streets were quiet, damp from last night's rain, and the gray light of dawn made everything look softer than it felt inside me. My hair still smelled faintly of frosting even after 2 showers, and the necklace sat safe in the small velvet pouch in my purse. I couldn't bring myself to wear it, not yet. My heart ached, but as I crossed the Sagamore Bridge and the Cape air hit my face, I felt the weight begin to shift. Grandpa Henry's house stood at the end of a gravel driveway in Barnstable, its white siding gleaming despite its age. Blue shutters framed the windows, and an American flag flapped gently on the porch. I had visited that house countless times as a child, and every memory of it felt steady. Family barbecues in the backyard, fishing rods leaning against the fence, the warm smell of coffee drifting out on early mornings. Unlike my parents' house, this place had never been filled with harsh words or cruel comparisons. It was safe. When I stepped out of the car, Grandpa was already on the porch, a mug of coffee in his hand. His silver hair caught the light, and his face broke into the kind of smile that makes you believe you're exactly where you're supposed to be. "Nora," he said, his voice deep but gentle, "come inside." The kitchen smelled like toasted bread and fresh coffee. He set a plate of buttered toast in front of me and poured me a cup before I had even asked. We sat together at the wooden table, the same one that had seen decades of family meals. He didn't rush me. He just waited, eyes kind but steady, until the words spilled out. I told him everything, from the moment Kayla whispered in my ear to the cake sliding onto my head. My voice cracked when I described my parents' laughter and the look in Kayla's eyes, but Grandpa never interrupted. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath, as though he had been holding it in for years. "I've watched them treat you like this for too long," he said finally. "Your grandmother saw it too, which is why she gave you that necklace in the first place. She wanted you to have something of your own, something they couldn't touch. And now, it's my turn to do the same." I frowned, not understanding. He pushed his mug aside and pulled a thick folder from the sideboard. The papers inside were neatly clipped and organized, each section marked with sticky notes. My name was written on the top in his careful handwriting. "This," he said, sliding the folder toward me, "is the Campbell Family Trust. I've been preparing it for a year. After last night, I see no reason to wait." My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Property lists, bank accounts, tax documents. The brownstone in Boston where my parents lived. A 2-story rental house in Cambridge that brought in steady income. A small marina slip in Quincy, where Grandpa used to keep his boat. The Cape House where we now sat. Even 5 acres of land in western Massachusetts, complete with a red barn and an orchard. Then there were the accounts, savings, municipal bonds, certificates of deposit, adding up to over $2,300,000. "Grandpa, this is everything," I whispered. He nodded. "Everything I've built. And I want you to manage it now. You're steady, Nora. Steady matters more than loud. They've taken advantage of your silence, but I know it's not weakness. It's strength. You'll protect this, just like you protect that necklace." Before I could protest, he reached for the phone and dialed a number from memory. Within an hour, Angela Price, his attorney, arrived. She was a woman in her early 40s with calm eyes and a sharp mind. She spread the documents across the table, explained each one clearly, and guided us through the signatures. By noon, the trust had been made irrevocable, naming me sole trustee and beneficiary. It was official. When I signed the final page, my hands shook so badly I had to steady the pen. Angela notarized each document, her stamp pressing into the paper like the sound of doors locking behind me, doors that would never open the same way again. Grandpa watched me the whole time, his eyes proud but a little sad. When Angela left, Grandpa opened a small wooden box with a brass latch. Inside was a single silver key and a leather notebook, the pages filled with his handwriting. "This is the record," he said, placing them in my hands. "Every rent payment, every repair, every name of every worker I've trusted over the years. This is how you'll keep the trust alive. It's all here." I clutched the box to my chest, overwhelmed. "Why me, Grandpa? Why not Dad, or even Mom?" His smile was soft but firm. "Because they've forgotten what family means. You haven't. You may feel small, but you carry the weight better than all of them. And I know you'll do what's right." That afternoon, I sat in the living room staring at the stack of signed documents. The reality of it pressed down on me. In the span of hours, my life had shifted. I wasn't just the quiet daughter anymore, the one overlooked while Kayla shone. I was now the trustee of millions in property and assets. The brownstone my parents lived in was legally mine. The trust gave me not only authority but responsibility. When I drove back to Boston that evening, the city looked different. The brownstone that once felt like a prison now stood tall and dignified, its bricks glowing in the late sun. I walked inside, my heart pounding. My parents were in the kitchen, sipping wine and talking about the party as if nothing had happened. I cleared my throat. "We need to talk." My father looked up, annoyed, as if I were interrupting something important. My mother's eyes narrowed. Kayla smirked from the corner. "I met with Grandpa today," I said, my voice firm though my palms were damp. "He transferred the family trust to me. The brownstone, the Cambridge house, the land, the accounts. They're all in my name now. Legally, I am the trustee and owner. You have 2 weeks to find another place to live." For a moment, silence stretched across the room. Then my father laughed, loud and cruel. "Don't be ridiculous, Nora. You? In charge? That's absurd." My mother sneered. "You're making up stories again. You think you can scare us." I pulled the certified documents from my bag and laid them on the counter. Their faces paled as their eyes scanned the pages. My father's laughter died in his throat. My mother's hands trembled as she set her glass down. "This isn't a joke," I said quietly. "This is final. You can stay here for 2 weeks while you make arrangements, but after that, this house is mine. I've given you notice. I'll expect you to respect it." My words weren't loud, but they were steady. For the first time in years, they had no power over me. As I climbed the stairs to my room that night, my hands no longer shook. The necklace lay in its pouch on the nightstand, and I slipped it around my neck once more. Its weight felt different now. Heavier, yes, but also stronger. It wasn't just a gift anymore. It was a promise kept, both from Grandma Ruth and now from Grandpa Henry. For the first time, I felt like the steady one. And steady was enough. 9 days after I told my parents the house was no longer theirs, the real test began. That morning, I heard heavy steps thundering down the stairs. My father appeared with a suitcase banging against each step, his jaw clenched tight. My mother followed behind him, clutching a box filled with plates and glassware wrapped in newspaper. Kayla stood outside on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, glaring at me as if she were the true victim in all this. By then, I had already taken precautions. The locks had been changed within 24 hours of the trust transfer. I had hired Marcus Lee, reliable property manager who knew Boston housing law inside and out. I also brought in Jenna, a locksmith I trusted to handle any disputes. I had documented every move, copies of emails, photos of notices taped to their door, receipts for the moving truck I'd prepaid, even certified letters sent through the postal service. My grandfather's words echoed in my head, steady beats loud, so I made sure that every detail was precise. The law is clean when the records are clean. When my father reached the door, he tried to barrel through me as if I were still the daughter too afraid to speak up. But I didn't move. I stood squarely in the doorway and raised the certified copy of the trust deed I carried in a folder. "This house is mine," I said, my voice steady. "The deed lists me as trustee and owner." He smacked the paper out of my hand, sending it fluttering to the floor. Marcus bent down and picked it up without a word, holding it carefully as if it were evidence. Jenna remained at my side, silent but firm. "We're not leaving," my mother hissed, her eyes wild. "You're our daughter, and this is our home." I lifted my phone and dialed Angela, the attorney. I put her on speaker, so everyone could hear. Her calm voice filled the hallway like a straight road with no turns. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield," she said, her tone sharp as steel. "The trust is valid. The property belongs to Nora. If you attempt to force entry or refuse to vacate, we will file for a restraining order. The moving truck has already been arranged and paid for as a courtesy. I suggest you take advantage of that before further legal action becomes necessary." For a moment, the air went still. My father's face turned red, my mother's lips trembled, and Kayla muttered something under her breath. But in the end, they dragged their suitcases and boxes to the curb, slamming doors and shouting angry words as they left. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was soft, almost pitiful, as if the rage from before had melted away. She said they were sorry, that they had overreacted. She begged to come back, insisted we were still family. She even mentioned that Kayla needed the emerald necklace for a charity gala, as though humiliating me, and then asking for the one thing I refused to give was a normal request. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly before I answered. "I heard your apology," I said. "But I cannot forgive what you did. You threw a cake on my head in front of everyone and laughed. You don't get to erase that." My mother cried softly on the other end. My father muttered something about blood ties. I held my ground. I told them I would cover the cost of a short-term rental in Somerville for 2 months so they could settle elsewhere. That was as far as my generosity would reach. When I hung up, I felt something heavy but clean inside me. I wasn't heartless. I wasn't cruel. I was simply drawing a line no one had ever let me draw before. The following week, I moved into the top-floor unit of the brownstone. The ceiling stretched high, and the afternoon light spilled across the hardwood floors. I painted the living room a pale cream, scrubbed out the last sticky stain of frosting from the rug, and polished the wood banister until it gleamed. Each change felt like an act of reclamation, a quiet statement that this was my home now. At night, I walked down to the Charles River and let the cool air brush my face. Sometimes I wore the emerald necklace around the apartment when loneliness crept in, then tucked it safely back into the small safe I bought with my first trust check. Each time I looked in the mirror with it around my neck, I felt a spark of my grandmother's strength. I sent photos of the newly painted rooms to Grandpa Henry. He replied with handwritten notes mailed in cream envelopes, his words neat and steady. In one letter he wrote, "The house looks happier now, Nora. I think you do too." For a little while, I believed the storm had passed. But one evening, a knock came at the door. When I opened it, a sheriff's deputy stood on the step holding a folded paper. He asked for my name, then handed it to me with a curt nod before walking away. My stomach dropped as I read. It was a petition filed by my parents. They claimed the transfer of the trust had been the result of undue influence. They alleged that Grandpa Henry had not been of sound mind. They asked the court to freeze the trust and issue a temporary order blocking me from controlling the properties. By the time I reached the bottom of the page, my hands were trembling. For 2 days, under the court's temporary order, I was barred from the brownstone. I packed a small bag and checked into a modest hotel near Copley Square. The city lights outside my window blurred as I stared out, feeling like the ground beneath me had disappeared. I called Angela immediately. Her voice was steady, reassuring, even as she confirmed the seriousness of the petition. "There's a hearing set for Friday," she told me. "Bring the notebook your grandfather gave you, the key, the trust documents, and your witness list. Most importantly, bring your steady voice. The court needs to see who you are." That week felt endless. I carried the leather notebook everywhere, flipping through the careful records Grandpa had kept, every rent payment, every contractor's receipt, every handwritten note about repairs. It was proof of his clarity, his planning, his intention. Each night, I touched the necklace before bed, reminding myself that I had already survived worse. If I could stand with cake dripping down my face while my parents laughed, I could stand in front of a judge and tell the truth. By Friday morning, I was ready. My documents were in order. My witnesses had been called. And as I walked toward the courthouse in Boston, the sound of my own footsteps on the pavement reminded me of what Grandpa had said, "Steady beats loud." And I intended to prove it. The Boston courthouse loomed tall and cold as I walked up its steps that Friday morning. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to take slow, steady breaths. Angela met me at the entrance, her navy suit perfectly pressed, a slim file tucked under her arm. "Remember," she whispered as we walked inside, "the truth is on your side. Speak simply. Speak steadily." We entered the courtroom together. My parents sat across the aisle, their lawyer, Paul, shuffling papers like he had already won. Kayla sat beside them, her face buried in her phone, as if the whole hearing were beneath her. I sat straight in the wooden chair beside Angela, wearing a plain black dress and flats. I didn't need to outshine anyone. I just needed to hold my ground. The judge entered, his robe sweeping as he sat behind the bench. His expression was calm, exact, with no patience for theatrics. He asked simple questions, and Angela answered with precision. She handed him the trust deed, the notarized papers, and the careful ledger my grandfather had kept in his notebook. Every record, every receipt, every name of a roofer or plumber, it was all there, proof that Grandpa Henry had been of sound mind and steady hand. When it came time, Angela called Grandpa by video from the Cape. His face filled the courtroom screen, his smile warm even through the cold technology. "Good morning, Judge," he said with a small wave. He answered every question clearly. He listed each property by name, described the plan he had drafted a year earlier, and explained why he had chosen me as trustee. When he finished, his voice softened. "I'm proud of my granddaughter. She is steady. She will protect what I built." For a moment, my chest swelled with pride. I thought the case was finished. But then Paul, my parents' attorney, cleared his throat and produced a paper from a worn folder. "Your Honor," he said, his tone oily, "we have here an overlooked document." He handed it to the judge. My stomach dropped. I had never seen it before. It was an old side agreement signed years ago, granting my parents a life estate in the garden-level apartment of the brownstone. The agreement allowed them to live there for $1 a year and, most importantly, gave them the right to remove any occupant from that unit for as long as they lived. The judge read the document once, then again, his brows furrowed. Finally, he lifted his eyes and spoke. The trust deed stands. The transfer to Nora Whitfield is valid. But this life estate also stands. It is recorded, it is binding, and it must be honored. That means your parents retain control of the garden-level apartment. They may remove any occupant from that unit during their lifetime, even the trustee. His words struck me like a physical blow. The trust was mine, the properties were mine, but they still held a narrow right carved out by an old piece of paper. My parents had lost almost everything, yet they had found one tiny thread of power to cling to, and they would not let it go. The judge ended the temporary order, restored me as trustee, and dismissed the court. Relief and disappointment twisted together inside me. I had won, but not completely. In the hallway afterward, my parents approached. Their faces wore a mix of triumph and bitterness. My mother's voice softened, as if she had rehearsed it. "Nora, we're sorry again. Let's put this behind us. Give Kayla the necklace, and we can all move forward." I looked at them, then at Kayla, who smirked as if victory was already hers. I shook my head. "I forgive the child in me, who wanted your love. But I don't forgive you. And I never will." Their smiles vanished. They turned and walked away, Kayla's heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. 2 days later, the notice came. While the top-floor bathroom of the brownstone was being repaired, I had temporarily moved into the garden-level unit. My parents used the life estate to evict me. Legally, they had that right. The paper was small, but its power cut deep. To be told I was barred from part of my own property felt like being exiled within my own walls. I packed my things quietly and returned to the top floor once the repairs were finished. I refused to cry. Instead, I set the garden unit aside and poured my focus into the rest of the trust. I rented out the Cambridge house to a kind family for $4,200 a month. They had 2 young children who loved the backyard, and each time the rent came in, I thought of it as proof that I could manage this trust well. I hired a young painter named Elena from Dorchester to repaint the red barn on the acres out west. She worked long hours, and when she sent me photos of the finished barn glowing in fresh crimson paint, I mailed her a bonus check with a handwritten thank you. In Quincy, I bought a small used boat and moored it at the slip. It wasn't much, but when Grandpa visited, we took it out onto the water, his fishing rod steady in his hands. Watching him smile on the deck made me realize that the trust wasn't just about money. It was about keeping the family legacy alive in a way my parents had long forgotten. Every night, I tracked the accounts, raised the reserves, and filed each receipt carefully. I became meticulous, almost obsessive, but it brought me peace. The trust was steady because I was steady. And at night, when the city grew quiet, I would sit by the bay window of the brownstone and watch the lights shimmer across the skyline. I thought about love, about family, about how fragile and sharp both could be. My parents had chosen a narrow victory, a small corner of the building they could still control, but in the process, they had lost something larger, me. Sometimes I took the emerald necklace from the safe and clasped it around my neck. I would look at myself in the glass, the stones glowing faintly in a reflection, and remember Grandma Ruth's voice telling me to guard it with my life. I realized then that the necklace was more than a gift. It was a symbol of the strength I carried, the strength my parents had tried to break but never could. My name is Nora Whitfield. I live in America. I own what I own. I protect what I protect. My parents chose bitterness, and I chose peace. They clung to a paper right in a single room. I claimed a steady life across every other part of the trust. And steady beats loud. Every day. Every time.